To understand the decisions President Biden has taken in Afghanistan, we need to understand the decisions taken by his predecessor, Donald Trump. Because in early 2020, the US signed a deal with the Taliban.
In Afghanistan, 19 years, going on 20 years, and there hasn't been a moment like this. We've had very successful negotiations. We think they'll be successful in the end.
Joe Biden said this deal meant he inherited a stark choice.
When I came into office, I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season.
Not everyone accepts this was a binary choice. President Biden has, after all, rapidly reversed or altered a range of Trump policies. Not here, though. So let's look at what the agreement he's followed contains. Back in 2020, Donald Trump's goal was clear.
Time to come home, and they want to stop. You know, they've been fighting a long time.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo called it the best opportunity for peace in a generation. And he was present when, on February the 29th last year, the deal between the Taliban and the US was done. Note, also present was the Taliban political chief, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar. He was the Taliban official who signed the deal. He'd been released from a Pakistani jail at the request of the US. And this is what was in the deal. First of all, it put a date on the US departure. There would be a full withdrawal of all foreign forces by May 2021, so long as the Taliban kept to its side of things. The date was pushed back by Joe Biden to August, but the deal told the Taliban precisely when the Americans would exit the conflict. In return, the Taliban made a number of commitments. The Taliban agreed to not attack US personnel. It promised to restrict any activity that could threaten the US, including terror attacks abroad. Here's the section in the deal. It reads, the Taliban will not allow any of its members, other individuals or groups, including al-Qaeda, to use the soil of Afghanistan to threaten the security of the US and its allies. The Taliban, in return, got the release of thousands of fighters who were in prison. Here's the text of the deal again. It says the deal commits the Afghan authorities to expeditiously release combat and political prisoners as a confidence-building measure with the coordination and approval of all relevant sides. That was the US effectively agreeing to the release of prisoners in Afghanistan without involving the Afghan government. The prisoners released were fighters and senior figures from an organisation with a long record of killing civilians and restricting women's rights and girls' education. It was billed, remember, as a confidence-building measure. No doubt it was for the Taliban, less so for many others, and for good reason. Subsequent research by the Afghan Peace Dialogue Project in Northern Ireland found that former Taliban prisoners were participating in combat, being killed fighting, being taken prisoner, and one case of an ex-prisoner being involved with revenge assassinations. The deal also contains multiple references to the need for a political settlement in Afghanistan. Here's the phrase: a new post-settlement Afghan Islamic government as determined by the intra-Afghan dialogue and negotiations. In other words, a deal between the Taliban and the government. Talks between the two sides did take place last year, but went nowhere. This is the then President, Ashraf Ghani, speaking to the BBC's Lise Doucette about the talks.
It takes two parties. We have a sense of urgency.
Do you think the Taliban are negotiating in good faith?
Well, the jury is out.
The president's jury was out. The fact that those talks didn't make any headway is something Mike Pompeo has since picked up on. He told Fox News Sunday the deal obliged the Taliban to engage in meaningful power-sharing agreement talks before we completed our requirement to fully withdraw. He would put the failure to enforce that at President Biden's door. Other former Trump officials think the problem was in the deal itself. Donald Trump's second national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, has since bluntly dismissed it as a surrender agreement. There was another concern too. In the months that followed, the Times correspondent Anthony Lloyd reflected, I can't think of a recent successful peace deal which has excluded the government from negotiations. More recently, Lisa Curtis, an Afghanistan expert who served during the Trump administration, has described the Doha talks as an unfair negotiation because nobody was looking out for the interests of the Afghan government. Well, as the Taliban advanced through June and July, President Biden's emphasis was on the Afghan government taking responsibility.
We gave them every tool they could need. We paid their salaries, provided for the maintenance of their Air Force. We gave them every chance to determine their own future.
But the government Joe Biden wanted to have the strength and confidence to resist the Taliban was the same government the Americans left outside the negotiating room in Doha. It's the government the US didn't tell before leaving Bagram Air Base in July. Perhaps in the end, rather than building confidence, the deal did the reverse for the government when its relationship with Afghans was already fragile. All of which doesn't explain everything about the Taliban's takeover, nor does it settle the rights and wrongs of the US withdrawal. It does, though, help us understand the consequences of that withdrawal. Remember Abdul Ghani Baradar? He went from prison in Pakistan to talks with the Americans, and now to this, a triumphant return to Afghanistan last week. He's now a central figure as the Taliban plans a new government. Then there's Ashraf Ghani, the man not at the negotiating table in Doha. When the talks were happening, he was president, an elected president. Last week, he was in exile, posting statements on Facebook and being told by the US that he was no longer a figure in his country. And then there's Joe Biden and the US, not budging an inch.
I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw US forces.
Which leads us back to the deal. When it was done, both sides had their top priority, the outcome they wanted above all else. For the US, it was getting out. For the Taliban, it was getting power. And now, the Americans are leaving. Donald Trump wanted this, Joe Biden wants this. Not in these circumstances, of course, but he wants it to happen all the same. And then there's the Taliban. It now controls the streets and the country. Both priorities have come to pass, and the Doha deal played its part in making sure they did.